Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the first 3 years of Pinnacle Football Cards. Pinnacle was created by Score as their first premium brand. There have been a couple of brands before this that have been premium brands. In 1989, Topps created Bowman to be kind of a higher tier card set, and it didn't really work too well. It started out working okay, but then it kind of faded off. But when that was released, Upper Deck came out with a card brand that was sold at a really expensive rate, basically twice as much for each pack. And so they established the level of what all premium cards would have to be, and everyone would eventually have to answer the bell. But it was kind of an outlier in 1989. So in 1990, there wasn't an expectation that there would be much of a demand for this, except that during the course of the year, 3 brands popped out that kind of showed everybody that this would need to be taken seriously, which were Action Packed in football and Skybox in basketball. But most notably, Donruss created a second set called Leaf. Now, they'd been making Leaf cards, but this was the first time that they launched Leaf as an independent brand, and they did so to compete really head-to-head with Upper Deck. So while Topps had kind of hoped that Bowman would pull this off, but it didn't really, it was with Leaf, Donruss's release of Leaf, that the reality of card companies having a premium brand as well became serious. So in 1991, everybody responded to this by creating a premium brand. And some of the brands weren't all that successful, like Fleer with their Ultra set. They created an attempt, but they didn't really know what they were doing. But with Score, they actually pulled it off beautifully, and to such a high extent that they essentially passed even Upper Deck. So in 1989, Upper Deck established a very high standard. In 1990, Leaf showed that you could compete pretty much at that same level. And then in 1991, Pinnacle moved it forward and established a new high, showing the competitive nature that everybody would have to take into consideration. And with these Pinnacle cards, they were really well designed. They used a slightly better cardstock than they were normally using. It was a little firmer. They used a semi-gloss to gloss finish on the card front, making the cards really look expensive. They looked fancy, and it just heightened all the information on the card front. One thing that Pinnacle did that was really impressive was counterfeiting had been a big problem in the 80s, and so Upper Deck had put its holograms on the card back in order to do anti-counterfeiting. Well, Pinnacle wanted to do the same thing, and so for them, if you look down at the bottom, you'll see this little band, this little box that has kind of a fade of stuff in between. There's actually a reader where if you use the reader, you can actually see to verify that yes, in fact, these are the original printed cards. And then the card design itself was very well crafted. It was well thought out. There was a lot going on. They knew all the right things they needed to do. They did make a card that was a little bit too busy for 1991. This would be a better card for about 93 or 94. But at this point, the card came out looking kind of too far ahead of its time, but still, it was an amazing card. And there are a lot of things going on this card. They still have a white border around the outside, which actually for Score was very unusual. And then inside they have a black, you could almost say a border with a couple of things going on. And they have a color bar that fades from white to a team color for the team name. And then for the player name, it's in yellow down at the bottom. So there's a lot of color on this, but not too much color. Basically, the main color comes from the image of the player, which is kind of inset in all of this. But still, there's a lot going on the front to the point where there's a lot of interest, and it's very well balanced. Whoever designed this card really, really did understand design. And then on the card back, they had a couple of things going on. They had a nice image of a helmet. They had a nice cutout shot of a player, very isolated. It almost doesn't fit with the rest of the card the way that the cutout fits, but you know, that's what they did. And then up at the top, they have a yellow to white band for the player name. It's that way on every single card. So this is the way that they design their cards, and man, it was good. It really was an impressive card. It surpassed, like I said, it surpassed Upper Deck, and it showed everybody that you were really going to have to start thinking about these cards and planning ahead. So the set was designed in a random fashion of players, and unlike the Score cards that even through this year were still broken into different border colors based upon each 110 card block, here it was all done the same way, where they let the team color be the differentiator between all the cards. So once you broke the card sets down into teams, they all lined up. They all looked good, which was a good thing that they did. But they didn't really need to do anything with the whole magnitude of these cards, in part because they had some really good subsets that came at the end. The first one being rookies. Now the rookie cards are done exactly the same way as the main cards in the set, except in this case, instead of using a black inset border, they use green. I'm not a fan of the green, but it still looks pretty good. And then instead of using team colors, they just used yellow for the fades. On the card back, you do have a really good mugshot. You do have the helmet on it, so you see what team the player is on, but on the card front, you have a really good action shot of the player on the team, so it doesn't really matter. You're going to have that anyway. And then they have their subsets, which start off with head-to-head, which is two really tight headshots or tight shots of the player in their helmets facing off against each other. So you're looking at two players who are kind of adversarial. And then you have technicians, and this is looking at specialists at individual positions. On the card front, they have a little faded over area with some kind of like some technical specs, drawing sketches on it, talking about it looks like it's looking into the mechanics, but it's kind of talking about their dedication to their craft. And then on the card back, the whole card back is designed like a blueprint. So this card kind of hits a little too close to home for me, but it's an interesting card concept that they went with, at least. Then they have the game winners, and game winners are black and white all the way on the card front with only the color image of the player, bringing any life to the card front. It's actually really nice the way that they did it, where they kind of emphasized the fact that the border is not the point. So the border works really well as a framework for the main cards. Very well done. However, if you turn it over, that's where they put all the color, and they put a lot of color on it, so it really does kind of make up the difference. They also did a subset called Idols, and this is where you have a cutout shot, a small cutout shot of the player in full color in front of a larger sepia color of a player who was an influence to the subject of this card. And the player who was the influence isn't necessarily a football player. Usually it is, but not always. And so these are really nice cards. I don't like the white border on them. I think that it's definitely a detriment to it, but otherwise the cards look great. And on the card backs, the horizontal orientation is really kind of nice. So overall, these cards are almost fantastic. Then they did a couple of really interesting cards that were kind of spread out at the end. They have a card looking at the Immaculate Reception with two images, one on top of the other. They have one for Ezra Tuaolo when because he sang the national anthem. And you have a gorgeous shot of the Metrodome where the Super Bowl was played. And this card is fantastic. The shot that they chose, the way that they made the card, the tone of it, I love it. And then they also did a card looking at Kenny Walker, and it's always nice when they do something for Kenny Walker, because he was a story that you just never hear about. Basically a completely deaf player who was able to make it in the NFL. And then they finished the setup with their Sidelines cards, and Sidelines basically looks at, for individual players, it looks at certain hobbies or usually side businesses that they have out in the real world. Now back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, every player had a summer job. Basically, football was their winter thing to do, and then the rest of the year they had an actual career. Well, now it's the other way around, and so this is a set that looks at special little interests, but primarily skills that various players have. So it could be Louis Lip's cookie company, or in this case, Bart Oates is a lawyer. So it's an interesting approach they take, and the cards are gorgeous because they're full bleed, they're very, very dark. And it's a really nice black and white shot down at the bottom with the high color and very well photographed shot up at the top. So for 1991, that was all they did. They didn't do any inserts, they didn't do anything special, they just did that. And so in 1992, since they had basically established the high water mark, they now had the opportunity to continue to run with pretty much the nicest cards in the hobby. Upper Deck would improve quite a bit in 1992. Ultra would shoot clean past them. But for Pinnacle, they were able to maintain the high quality cards that still look great. They got rid of the white border by adding a black border around the outside. So now you have a black border around the outside and then a black border inset with a much larger shot of the player. And the player is spilling out onto that inner black border. So the card, it looks a lot better in how it's designed. And they have a much bigger box down at the bottom with the fade to team color on it. So the way that the card was designed, it wasn't quite as crazy as in the previous year, but it was more refined, more focused, and I like the 91 better, but I love the 92 almost as much. These cards look great. The card backs were now horizontal. They were better laid out in terms of just how they used the real estate, which often happens with a horizontal card back. They actually have a photo of a helmet on the card backs. Now, the way that it's oriented in the little picture, it looks almost, to me, it's always looked more like a mini helmet, even though it is a regular helmet. But that's the one thing in the card that for me is always kind of awkward. I love it, and at the same time, it kind of grabs my eye and kind of throws me off. For the rookies, they still differentiated the rookies, but they didn't do it by changing any colors. Here they just put a little rookie logo on the front, and on the back they put another rookie logo. Otherwise, they're the same as the regular cards in the set. And then also the band of color up at the top on the card back is purple to white. That's the way it is on all the cards. So just like in 91 where they used yellow, here they used purple. Then they did a couple of subsets again. They started off with game winners, and here they used a field of text, all saying game winners, and then one piece of that text is replaced by, in red letters, the name of the player. So it kind of fits into it, which is a cool concept to go with. The cards do look pretty good, but they don't look great in my opinion. They also did sidelines again, and here the way that they approached the cards really was a big step down. Basically, they have a huge space for a shot of the player in whatever he happens to be doing. You're looking at Herschel Walker here, who was competing for the Olympics in the bobsled. And so these cards are entirely reliant on those pictures really carrying well, and they don't tend to. So this wasn't as successful. They also added Hall of Fame cards in this. So these are the players who had been inducted into the Hall of Fame. And here you have a shot of the player posing next to his bust with a stock shot of the Hall of Fame in sepia in the background. And all horizontal, gorgeous cards. These look great. Hall of Fame cards usually do look pretty good. These look exceptionally good. So I am a big fan of these cards. And then they closed the set out with idols. And here, like I had alluded to previously, they got rid of the border. And because they got rid of the border, the cards look so much better. These look fantastic. On the card back's now vertical as opposed to horizontal. Not quite as good, but still, these are really great cards. So that's the way they closed the set out. And then they did two insert sets. The first one being Team Pinnacle. This is something they would do basically all the way until Pinnacle stopped being made. These cards have a front and a back. They have offense on one side, defense on the other, and it's players who are basically kind of squared off against each other. And the way that they approached it was a 3/4 bleed with an image, an artistic image of the player. It's all in stipple. Now I think it's a photograph that they use some trick to make the stippling, but it looks like art, and it really does look good as a result of that. The other insert that they did was a jumbo pack insert called Team 2000, and this is players who are young, so they're still rising up into their career, but so it's kind of like young guys to pay attention to. It's kind of the theme that they went with these cards. They look great. They are pretty common, but it doesn't matter because these are gorgeous cards to definitely get a set of if you've never had the chance to. So for 1993, they were still kind of right up at the top, but they were already starting to get past, and they unfortunately kind of scaled back the way that they made their Pinnacle cards. So they really simplified them in pretty much every way. The front of the cards don't look very good at all. They're okay, but they don't have any of the interest that had been done before. The only thing I really like about these cards is the gold foil Pinnacle name down at the bottom. That's nice. Otherwise, they've kind of lost their interest. On the card back, likewise, it is just super, super simplified. So these cards are becoming more standard. And in a way, it kind of makes sense because 1993 was the year that Score put all of their energy into their Select brand. So Pinnacle was no longer carrying the company. It was now second fiddle to their truly elite card. In 1994, they would kind of revamp things and bring Pinnacle back to being a really prominent card. But for 1993, unfortunately, it got hit pretty hard. They only did a couple of subsets, and here this starts off with Hall of Fame cards. These look more like a plaque. They're still really nice. I don't like them quite as much because they don't use the real estate. The image for the player is just way too small, but other than that, these are extremely well designed cards. And then the other subset that they did was their Hometown Heroes cards. So this was the first year, almost all of the subsets were reused in 1992, and then one was added, and then in 1993 they got rid of all the 91 subsets, and they just went with basically just these two. So Hometown Heroes is basically players who are currently or were currently playing for a football team in pretty much their hometown market. And it's a nice thing to see what local kids were on their hometown teams, or a few of them. But this set, they wanted to go more into the insert sets, and they had a fair number. They started off with the Team Pinnacle again, and this year they still used the stippling approach, but now they had a black border around the outside, so the card was designed more like the main cards in the set. The cards now are no longer offense and defense. It's basically two players who are playing pretty much the same position. So that was what they went with these cards, but they are still very nice. They also went with their Team 2000 again, but this time it's Team 2001. These again are jumbo pack inserts, and it's basically the same thing. It's, you know, we talked about some young kids the previous year, now we're talking about young kids this year. That kind of a thing. They also did an insert set of rookie cards, and here they use Dufex on the front. On the back they use a chrome finish. Now with the Dufex on the front, they didn't get very crazy. In Select they tended to get kind of crazy with the Dufex. Here it's a lot more subdued, which to me is kind of a disappointment. I really like the liveliness that they normally do with it, but here they just went with a very straightforward, simple card that really does fit with the spirit of Pinnacle. And then the last insert set that they did was Men of Autumn. And these are star players. The card front looks a lot like the cards in the regular set. That's about all there is to say about it. It's really not all that interesting. They also did a box topper of players from the Super Bowl winning Cowboys. This has a blue foil on it, and they're there. I'd like to say more, but I just think they're kind of a disappointment of a card. They really don't have a lot of energy to them. And then they did do a special giveaway for dealers who sold more than 20 boxes, or sold more than 19 boxes, so 20 or more. And this was a gift of an autographed Franco Harris card. These cards are all serial numbered, so there were 3,000 of them that were made. They're all serial numbered, and I think it's a print number of the serial number, but the numbers that they use are really cool. I like that. Now the card itself doesn't have anything special. There's no Dufex, there's nothing like that. It's just a straightforward image of Franco Harris signed on the front, but it's a really good shot of Franco Harris. It's a really close, tight action shot that looks great with him just barreling right toward the camera. I am not at all a Franco Harris fan, but I really like having this card in my collection because it really does look great. But that was basically about it. I mean, they did a card with Franco Harris and Eric Lindros, and they did another one that was kind of off on the periphery. But as far as Pinnacle proper, this was what they did for the first 3 years. And they started off beautifully, and by 1993 they were going to have to kind of reboot it, which pretty much everybody in the industry ended up doing after 1993. So it's no surprise. I'm going to look at that at a separate time. But for this, I wanted to look at the whole growth of Pinnacle and let you know all the little pieces that were involved with it. So that's basically what I've got for that. I hope you learned something. I hope that you'll check out other videos that I've done. Definitely look for the other Pinnacle videos coming up down the road, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And thank you very much for watching.